In this lesson, we'll use the existing geometry to create floors and ceilings. Now, this will probably be one of the simplest procedures for this building because we literally have all of the objects in place. We just need to change the modifiers in them and basically relayer them and recreate them from that existing geometry. So the original box that we had been using to create everything of our building, we can also move to the source object layer. We're not going to be using that one anymore. What we can do now is select all of these space frame objects, so that's 4 objects in total, and I can go and create a copy of those 4. So just type Control V again, copy, and isolate out those 4 copied objects. Next, you want to go in and just undo the lattice, and you can also undo the top 2 editable poly modifiers, which basically gave the 3-dimensional shape to those surfaces. We can do exactly the same thing here, and we can basically do the same thing here without removing this editable poly because it's the one that we used to basically make it slightly smaller. So right now these surfaces are pretty much the outlines of what the space frame was derived from. So we can convert all 4 of these objects now. We can even go down to convert to editable poly because we can always recreate them if we have to. And those can now go onto a different layer for floors and ceilings. So for example, these 2 at the bottom can be called ceilings. So let's go and create a 0,5 layer, and we can call this ceilings and 0,5 floors. So these 2 ceiling objects can now be on the ceiling layer. We can now relayer the floors as well, and we can then start to texture them appropriately. So once you go out of your isolation, you can see what you've started to create. Now you may want to move the floor layer slightly higher. So let's just go and increase the height. So we're going to move it upwards in the Z dimension. So I'm busy editing the figure here. I'm going to move it up by 0.2, and I'm going to take the ceiling object, the flat editable poly, and I'm going to move it down by 0.2 as well. And I'm going to take the same thing here, and I'm going to move it up. And this ceiling object I'm going to move down. So once all of this is done, you can then go and flip any faces. So for example, the entire floor should be facing upwards, and we can do the same thing for the ceiling. We can basically take that entire series of faces and make them point down, and this one is pointing upwards, which is the correct direction. So here as well, one of the things I'd like to do is I would like to cut out a neat round circle so that we can start to see the structure underneath. I don't want to necessarily cover the structure because I do find it quite interesting. And here we actually have our little staircase that is coming up. And this ring would probably be one that would have to be moved up higher, and this portal just slightly enlarged. So those things I'm not going to do because we have already covered that in previous lessons, how we go and edit the actual structure to this. But anyhow, it's quite interesting to now see how this is all coming together. So to go and cut this hole out, what we're going to do is we're going to use the source object layer, and let's just choose this sphere and isolate that out. I'm going to now make a copy of that sphere because I want to keep one copy as my source object, and I can now increase or decrease the size of it to basically decide where I want to make that slice. So I'm going to make it just big enough like so. And next I'm going to choose to Boolean it. So I'm going to go down to compound objects within the objects tab, and let's go down to compound. Next, choose Boolean, and I'm going to choose to refine it. It just seems to have better results in most cases, and I'm going to choose that sphere as the operand B. Next, I'm going to add an editable poly modifier. And once I select my polygons here, you'll see that all of these do disappear. So these polys, instead of deleting them, I'm going to detach them because I would like to create a glassy type of surface further so that we can see the structure underneath. So imagine that that would now be glazed so we can see through. And the rest of the surface will all be much harder, walkable and trafficable surfaces. So at this point, we would have some type of staircase coming up here. As I mentioned in the last lesson, we're not going to model that because it is quite simple, and I'm going to just leave out all of those simple steps. So now if I turn on my outer facade layer, I can also make that a bit more viewable by Alt-Xing it, but I do have such a dense mesh that it's quite difficult to see. But already you can start getting an idea of what this is starting to look like in its entirety. So we can start seeing through that facade. We can see that there is a depression inside the building. We can see that something's happening here, and you can definitely see where the entrance of this building is. And I think it has quite a logical order to it, even though it does look a little bit organic. So that pretty much brings me to the end of this lesson. What I'm going to do to the surfaces that we've just created for the floor is that if you want to start creating more detail on the top, we can start using things like multi-matte materials. For example, if you would like to indicate that a few of these areas are going to be grassed, or perhaps even a green felt, or any type of area where people can sit, and perhaps there can be a park on top here, then you can start creating those differences using multi-matte materials instead of modeling it. Because the multi-matte material is so quick to apply and quick to edit, the reason why it fits with a speed modeling workflow is because of that rapidity, or how quickly you can actually go and make it and apply it. So we're going to look at that in the next lesson as we start to apply basic materials to all of our different objects. So hang around for that so that we get the final stages of the building done as we start to near to a close, as we start finishing off our building.